Hello everyone, and a warm welcome to the channel, The Territory of Cinema. If you enjoy our content, please hit that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up. Today we are going to be discussing the movie Madagascar, Escape to Africa from 2008. The crew, having embraced their newfound freedom in Madagascar, decides that civilization is simply too confining, particularly for Alex the lion, whose past as a beloved Central Park Zoo star still tugs at the edges of his memory. Their shared desire to return to the concrete jungle, or at least see where they came from, leads them to charter a small, somewhat dilapidated airplane piloted by the penguins, Skipper, Kowalski, Rico, and Private, who, despite their knack for engineering, are perhaps less qualified for transcontinental aviation than they believe. The flight, naturally, doesn't go as planned. After some rather catastrophic mid-air mishaps involving the flight controls and a surprising amount of damage to the aircraft's structure, the plane makes an emergency landing deep within the heart of the African savanna. This landing is less a controlled descent and more a violent introduction to the ancestral homeland of Marty the zebra, Melman the hypochondriac giraffe, and Gloria the hippopotamus. For Marty, this arrival is a moment of profound self-discovery. He immediately connects with a massive herd of other zebras, realizing with elation that he is no longer the odd, slightly too enthusiastic outlier he was in the zoo. This sudden immersion into a community where he fits perfectly is thrilling, but it also introduces a complication: the presence of Makanga, an old grizzled zebra who views Marty's city ways as a dangerous eccentricity that threatens the herd's established order. Marty, fueled by the inspiration of belonging, tries desperately to prove his worth in the savannah. Meanwhile, Alex encounters two larger, more dominant lions: Zuba, his powerful father, and Makunga, a jealous rival eager to usurp Zuba's alpha status. Alex, whose main experience with lion politics involved performing synchronized roars for cheering tourists, finds the raw, high-stakes competition of the wild both terrifying and exhilarating. Zuba, proud of his son's apparent prowess, pushes Alex to participate in the essential annual ritual, the watering hole fight, a dangerous test of strength necessary to secure drinking water for the dry season. Alex's attempts to replicate his old stage moves, the confident strut, the practiced roar, are utterly ineffective against true predators. Melman, ever the anxious soul, is overwhelmed by the sheer scale and potential dangers of the savannah. His paranoia skyrockets when he encounters a vast, vibrant group of giraffes. For a fleeting moment, he is captivated, especially by a beautiful female giraffe named Gloria. However, his innate anxiety about germs, disease, and the structural integrity of his own long neck quickly undermines any blossoming romance. He spends most of his time either cataloging potential illnesses or trying to organize the local wildlife into a makeshift medical cooperative. Gloria, on the other hand, experiences a moment of existential dread when she realizes that, unlike the penguins who are brilliant escape artists and engineers, or Alex and Marty who have clear instincts, she possesses no discernible survival skill beyond being large and generally unmovable. Her desire is simply to find a comfortable place to lounge, which proves difficult amidst the dusty chaos. The penguins, predictably, manage to turn the wreckage of their plane into a functional base camp, utilizing their impressive, if slightly skewed, technical abilities. They immediately set about repairing the aircraft, viewing the entire African wilderness as a challenging, poorly organized obstacle course designed purely for their amusement and eventual escape. The climax centers on the drought, exacerbated by Makunga's sabotage, which has forced the animals to the nearly dry watering hole. Zuba is defeated in the fight by the cunning Makunga, who then takes control and demands the remaining water. Alex, recognizing that his performance skills might be better utilized than his hunting skills, realizes he must inspire his community. Remembering the precise timing and coordination of his zoo routines, Alex rallies the various animals, zebras, elephants, and even the slightly reluctant hippos, to perform a massive synchronized routine. This act of unity and spectacle distracts Makunga and his cronies long enough for Marty and the other zebras to reroute a nearby river using natural dams and teamwork, a practical application of community spirit that Marty finally masters. With water restored and Makunga expelled, Alex reconciles with Zuba, understanding that true strength lies not just in roaring louder, but in leading intelligently and appreciating the diverse talents of everyone around him, even those who prefer to talk about germs rather than hunt. The group prepares to leave, having learned that while they missed the vibrancy of New York, they found a deeper appreciation for their own unique friendships and capabilities in the wild before hopping back into their barely functional plane, ready for the next adventure. The forced landing in Africa was more than just an inconvenience for the foursome. It was an existential jolt. For Alex, the reunion with his lineage, embodied by the imposing Zuba, initially felt like stepping onto a stage where the script was written in blood and dust. Entirely unlike the polite applause of Manhattan, Zuba, a lion whose very bearing spoke of decades spent dominating the plains, viewed Alex's polished showman demeanor with a mixture of pride and deep, paternal disappointment. Alex's supposed roar, a carefully modulated sound perfected for maximum theatrical effect, dissolved into a pathetic wheeze when he tried to imitate the true, gut-wrenching challenge of the wild. This failure stung deeply, revealing the hollow core of his celebrity status when stripped of microphones and spotlights. Marty's immersion into the zebra herd was intoxicating, a sensory overload of familiarity. He reveled in the anonymity of belonging, finally free from the subtle pressure of being the different zebra. Yet Makunga, the herd's rigid traditionalist, saw Marty not as a returning prodigal, but as a contamination. Makunga embodied the uncompromising, harsh reality of survival, viewing Marty's exuberant, almost balletic movements as a frivolous waste of energy. Marty's struggle became a desperate, almost embarrassing attempt to overcompensate, attempting feats of zebra athleticism with an almost comical lack of natural grace, much to the quiet concern of his old friends. Melman's experience was a cascade of escalating medical crises. The sheer biodiversity of the savannah, to his highly specialized neurotic mind, represented an infinite number of previously undiagnosed, potentially fatal pathogens. His attempts to court Gloria were frequently interrupted by his need to sanitize a leaf or warn her about the structural dangers of standing near a particularly large termite mound. Gloria, recognizing that her bulk and inherent desire for comfort were not exactly assets in a survival scenario, felt a profound, quiet alienation. She watched the others find their calling, Marty belonging, Alex proving his worth, the penguins engineering chaos, and felt utterly stranded, a large, warm fixture looking for a very comfortable, very stable rock to settle upon permanently. The penguins, of course, treated the entire continent as their personal training ground. Their ability to repurpose scavenged materials into functioning subsystems for their broken plane was unnerving. Kowalski scribbled equations on bark. Skipper barked tactical orders concerning local bird populations as potential spies, and Rico continued to cough up exactly the right rusty wrench at the precise moment of crisis. Their sheer competence in localized disaster management provided a bizarre sort of stability amidst the rising tensions. When Makunga finally seized control by defeating Zuba, the stakes became immediate and terrifyingly real. The watering hole, the source of life, became a symbol of Makunga's tyranny. Alex, watching his mentor and father defeated, finally understood that sheer force was irrelevant. It was the performance of unity that mattered. He didn't need to roar like Zuba, he needed to conduct like a maestro. His memory drifted back to the coordinated routines he had devised for the zoo shows, the perfect timing of a four-lion pyramid, the synchronized head turns. He started directing, using his showmanship not for applause, but for survival. He marshaled the elephants to use their trunks like giant siphons, directed the monkeys to weave rope bridges from vines, and finally convinced the herds to move in concert, a breathtaking display of choreographed movement that momentarily paralyzed Makunga and his cronies, allowing Marty and the newly disciplined zebras to implement their swift, practical engineering solution to bring in outside water. The final image was one of genuine, hard-won respect. Alex, no longer just a star, but a leader who understood the power of collaboration, accepting the dusty reality of his heritage alongside the polished sheen of his past. The departure from the savannah was tinged with the bittersweet understanding that they had perhaps learned more about themselves in the chaos than they ever did in the comfortable confines of the Central Park Zoo. Alex, standing taller now, though still prone to dramatic gestures, accepted Zuba's final rough embrace. The old lion's acceptance wasn't based on Alex's newfound bravery in the face of Makunga, but on the intelligent application of his unique skill set, a realization that showmanship, when properly directed, was a powerful form of leadership. Alex finally stopped trying to mimic the primal snarl and embraced his natural flair for command. Marty, as he waved goodbye to the herd, carried a quiet confidence. Makanga's rejection had been painful, but the final coordinated effort with his fellow zebras had forged a bond deeper than mere shared markings. He had proven that his enthusiastic energy, which Makanga dismissed as city foolishness, was essential for dynamic problem-solving. He was still prone to bouncing, but now his movements felt purposeful, less manic. Melman, surprisingly, had gained a small measure of peace, though his neuroses remained finely tuned. He'd managed to establish a rudimentary health screening process for the local monkeys, leveraging his obsessive cataloging skills into something productive. Gloria, having seen Melman's unexpected devotion, found her own gravitational center. She realized that her desire for stability wasn't a weakness, it was the anchor the group needed. She saw that romance wasn't about finding another hippo who enjoyed lounging, but finding someone whose anxieties complemented her need for calm. Her burgeoning affection for Melman felt strangely solid, as sturdy as the ground she now walked upon with less panic. The penguin's exit was characteristically dramatic. They didn't just repair the plane, they significantly upgraded it, fitting it with various makeshift periscopes, catapults, and a highly dubious-looking inflatable stabilization system salvaged from a local bird nest. Skipper gave a curt nod to Zuba, acknowledging the brief, if unconventional, alliance, before climbing into the cockpit. The engine sputtered, coughed out a plume of oily black smoke reminiscent of a Broadway opening night curtain, and then, miraculously, roared to life. As they lifted off, leaving the vast, sun-baked landscape behind, the collective emotion wasn't just relief, but a profound sense of integration. They weren't just 4 zoo animals anymore. They were survivors, veterans of a genuine, untamed world. The concrete jungle beckoned, yes, but now they knew they carried the savannah within them, a wild, unpredictable, and utterly necessary component of who they were. The journey back promised to be just as turbulent, but now they were ready to steer. The return to the familiar, if strangely sterile, environment of the Central Park Zoo brought a strange dissonance. The enclosure, once their entire world, now felt small, the grass suspiciously uniform, and the applause of the sparse visitors utterly muted compared to the roars of the African plains. Alex found himself pacing, not with the practiced swagger of a star attraction, but with the restless energy of a lion accustomed to surveying wide horizons. He caught himself scrutinizing the faces of the zoo patrons, trying to decipher their needs and desires in the way he'd learned to read the subtle shifts in herd dynamics. His instinct was no longer to pose, but to organize, to assess potential threats and resources, skills the zoo administration had absolutely no use for. Marty, walking his usual route, found the boundaries physically frustrating. He'd often pause near the fencing, gazing toward the horizon where he knew Africa lay, feeling the pull of the vast open spaces. He noticed the other zoo animals, the bored monkeys, the placid bears, and a strange sense of duty settled upon him. He tried to introduce concepts like herd cohesion and synchronized grazing during the daily feeding schedule, which mostly resulted in confused stares, and Skipper, the penguin, attempting to recruit the zoo's resident tortoise for a covert mission involving a faulty sprinkler system. Marty's enthusiasm was infectious, but the setting dampened its effect. Enthusiasm needed room to breathe, and the concrete jungle offered only carefully measured cubic feet. Melman, back in his cage, was undergoing a strange form of withdrawal. The lack of immediate, life-threatening pathogens meant his anxiety had nowhere tangible to focus. He started meticulously documenting the humidity levels inside his enclosure, cross-referencing them with the city's historical weather patterns, turning his hypochondria into a bizarre form of long-term climatological research. Gloria watched him, a small, affectionate smile playing on her lips. The chaos of Africa had forced them to confront their deepest insecurities, and in doing so, had somehow cemented their strange, loving connection. She found a certain comfort in his predictable worry. It was stable, reliable, and significantly less terrifying than a pride of jealous alpha lions. The penguins, naturally, had not returned to simply resting. Having successfully navigated an intercontinental flight using sheer willpower and duct tape, the mundane routines of zoo life were intolerable. They treated the zoo itself as a temporary, poorly secured research facility. Kowalski was busy reverse engineering the automatic food dispensers, determined to weaponize them. Rico was experimenting with the structural integrity of the ice machine. Skipper, observing the zoo director's monotonous daily rounds, was already formulating a complex, multi-phase plan to liberate the entire facility, citing the recent African experience as proof that true freedom required constant, aggressive maintenance. They had brought the wilderness mentality back with them, infecting the zoo with a subtle, highly organized strain of rebellion. The air in their familiar habitat felt thin, almost tasteless, lacking the rich, earthy sense of dust, rain, and untamed life they had grown accustomed to. Alex, pacing his small corner of the enclosure, felt like a highly specialized machine repurposed for a job it no longer fit. His memory replayed Zuba's approving look, a look that acknowledged his strategic mind, something entirely absent from the Central Park management structure. He found himself staring critically at the small water trough, imagining it bone dry, and instinctively planning a series of synchronized roars to intimidate any nearby squirrels daring to approach. The ingrained habit of performance was hard to shake, but the purpose of the performance had irrevocably shifted from entertainment to survival leadership. Marty's attempts to inject savanna vitality into the zoo proceedings were met with bewildered apathy. He tried to organize a morning stampede drill, intending to foster quick coordination, but the other zebras, conditioned by years of predictable grazing, merely looked up, chewed slowly, and then returned to their meticulously portioned hay. He felt the sharp pang of Makanga's dismissal, that his exuberance was wasteful, but countered it internally. Here, in this manicured cage, the lack of spirit was the real waste. He started taking solo, frantic laps around the perimeter, a small personal rebellion against stagnation, his legs pumping with the phantom need to outrun an unseen predator. Melman's medical vigilance reached obsessive new heights, now turned inward and outward onto the human infrastructure. He cornered Gloria daily, presenting her with elaborate, hand-drawn diagrams illustrating the potential dangers lurking within the synthetic turf or the slightly discolored grout of the enclosure walls. "Gloria, the spores, they breed in the stagnation," he'd whisper, his long neck craning nervously. Yet this obsessive focus ironically brought him closer to Gloria. She found his unwavering, if misplaced, concern endearing. In Africa, his fear had been a hindrance. Here, his meticulous documentation of the zoo's minor structural flaws made him feel relevant, like a specialized zoo-appointed safety inspector rather than just a hypochondriac. She gently stroked his snout, appreciating the stability that his constant worrying provided amidst the post-adventure adjustment. The penguins, unable to tolerate inactivity, had identified the zoo's security system as their next great engineering challenge. Skipper decreed that their primary mission was Operation Upgrade Habitat Integrity, which primarily involved dismantling and reassembling anything that wasn't bolted down, and sometimes things that were. Kowalski had somehow fashioned a functioning shortwave radio from a discarded light bulb and some shiny coins, hoping to make contact with classified contacts in Antarctica. Rico, meanwhile, was hoarding various tools and shiny objects inside an overturned bucket, creating an ever-growing, highly specialized arsenal for their next inevitable jailbreak. They viewed the keepers not as authorities, but as frustratingly slow-moving obstacles in their ongoing quest for world domination, or at least better quality fish. They had experienced genuine freedom, and the zoo was now nothing more than a high-security testing ground for their refined escape artistry. The novelty of their homecoming wore off quickly, replaced by a gnawing sense that something essential had been misplaced somewhere between the savannah dust and the city smog. Alex, observing the human children pressing their faces against the glass, felt a profound disconnection. In Africa, his performance had earned water and respect. Here, it merely earned pocket change and sticky handprints. He often found himself in tense, silent standoffs with Maurice, the lemur, who, having also endured the African journey, seemed to share the lion's unspoken critique of their confinement. Maurice, ever the philosopher, would simply twitch his long fingers, a silent judgment on the superficiality of their captivity compared to the raw truths they had faced under the African sun. Marty's attempts at communal motivation escalated into near-performance art. Unable to truly run free, he started utilizing the available space for intricate obstacle courses, often attempting to teach the more agile lemurs complex synchronized maneuvers he'd observed in the zebra herds. This invariably ended with Julian, the self-proclaimed king, attempting to lead the stampede, but getting comically tangled in his own flowing mane. Marty didn't mind the failure. He was learning that leadership in a captive environment required patience and perhaps a slight adjustment in vocabulary, perhaps trading survival tactics for enrichment activities. Melman, having established his role as the zoo's unofficial, highly anxious health monitor, found a new focus when Gloria started spending more time near his enclosure. He'd developed a specific rhythmic tapping pattern against the wall, a complex code signaling his current state of well-being, or more frequently, imminent doom via airborne fungal spore. Gloria, who had once scoffed at his endless catalog of ailments, now recognized these taps as an expression of affection and anxiety bound together. She would tap back, a slow, deliberate, reassuring beat, signaling her presence and calming his frayed nerves. It was their language, forged in the fear of the unknown in Africa, now repurposed for the known anxieties of domestic captivity. The penguins, however, were thriving in the familiar infrastructure of the zoo, viewing it as a poorly defended fortress awaiting infiltration. Skipper's latest directive involved mapping the underground utility tunnels, convinced that the city's infrastructure was the key to true operational independence. Rico had successfully repurposed an old water hose into a surprisingly effective pneumatic delivery system for delivering strategic rations, stolen fish heads, to their hidden headquarters beneath the penguin habitat. Kowalski was sketching schematics for a device that could temporarily disable the electric fence using static electricity generated by private rubbing balloons on his fuzzy exterior. They weren't just surviving, they were actively treating their return as a long-term tactical occupation, waiting for the moment the world outside proved enticing enough or unstable enough to warrant another grand, unsanctioned expedition. The enforced domesticity began to breed a restlessness that the zoo environment simply could not absorb. Alex found himself constantly seeking higher ground, perched atop the artificial rocks in his enclosure, his eyes scanning the skyline of Manhattan, a jagged concrete imitation of the ancient ridges he had known in Africa. His connection to the wild had been visceral, and now, stripped of necessity, his leadership felt abstract. reduced to posing elegantly for the occasional camera flash. He started holding impromptu, silent sessions where he'd demonstrate perfect, controlled breathing techniques, a skill vital for conserving energy on the savannah, but the onlookers assumed he was merely yawning dramatically. His roar, when he felt truly frustrated, was held back, a deep, rumbling vibration trapped in his chest, lest he frighten the local pigeons or, worse, incite an unnecessary investigation from the concerned zookeepers. Marty's energy, unable to be channeled into genuine herd maneuvers, began to manifest in elaborate, near-manic pacing routines. He'd synchronize his dashes with the arrival of the maintenance carts, hoping to confuse the staff into thinking there was a perimeter breach. He tried to mentor the younger, less seasoned animals, whispering tales of the vastness, the danger, and the exhilarating feeling of running purely for the joy of motion. He spoke of Makanga with a strange mix of annoyance and gratitude, recognizing that the old zebra's rigidity had forced Marty to solidify his own, more fluid philosophy of life. He realized that fitting in wasn't about mirroring others, it was about finding others who celebrated your unique rhythm. Melman and Gloria's relationship deepened in the quiet absurdity of their routine. Gloria had taken to lying near Melman's enclosure during the afternoon sun, providing a large, warm, and decidedly germ-free buffer zone against the outside world. When Melman would launch into a detailed monologue about the microscopic dangers lurking in the shared water dispenser, Gloria would simply rest her massive head on the edge of his space, her steady breathing acting as a natural tranquilizer. She saw his anxiety not as a flaw, but as an intensely focused form of caring. She was the steady shore, he was the hyper-vigilant lighthouse keeper, and together they formed an unlikely, deeply rooted sanctuary in the middle of the zoo's artificial habitat. The penguins, having exhausted the practical possibilities of the zoo's ground-level systems, turned their attention upward. Skipper believed the ultimate security vulnerability lay in the airspace above. They began constructing a high-altitude surveillance drone out of salvaged plastic bottles, bicycle parts, and surprisingly resilient rubber bands. Private was tasked with morale and collecting fluffy components, a job he took with earnest diligence. Kowalski was obsessed with developing an anti-gravity device, certain that if they could master localized lift, their next escape would involve zero resistance. Rico, having successfully buried his cache of tools near the primary irrigation line, was now focused on breeding specialized, communication-capable carrier pigeons, viewing them as superior to their current, technologically inferior aircraft. Their goal wasn't just escape anymore, it was strategic transcendence of their environment, treating the entire city as a training simulation for their inevitable, grander endeavors. The palpable sense of anticlimax in the zoo was beginning to subtly warp their personalities, pushing them toward increasingly eccentric behaviors as they struggled to reconcile their recent wild experiences with the predictability of captivity. Alex, feeling the call of the open sky, started practicing his most impressive leaps over the shallow pool intended for his enrichment, landing with a dramatic splash that usually only startled the nearby lemurs, who were too busy watching Julian try to incorporate the penguin's discarded drone parts into his royal regalia. Alex missed the consequence of failure. Here, the only consequence of an imperfect performance was a slightly wetter enclosure. He yearned for the moment when his every strategic move had mattered to the survival of his pride, however temporary that pride had been. Marty, unable to simply run, began channeling his kinetic energy into rhythmic drumming on the enclosure floor, using his hooves to create complex polyrhythms that mimicked the pulse of the savanna migrations. He had developed a deep appreciation for natural organization, and now tried to enforce an almost militaristic order on his small community of zebras, insisting on designated quiet hours and organized foraging patterns. When this failed spectacularly, he'd retreat to the fence line, talking softly to the city beyond, describing the immense silent majesty of the stars unfiltered by city light, trying to share the beauty he'd witnessed with those who couldn't understand the context. Melman's dedication to health monitoring had evolved into a quasi-spiritual quest. He'd started making diagnosis wards inside his cage using carefully arranged twigs and leaves, treating minor insect bites or ruffled feathers he observed in passing animals. Gloria found this endearing, seeing the passion beneath the paranoia. One evening, as the city lights cast long, artificial shadows, she admitted to him that in Africa, when things were dire, his obsessive worrying was the only thing that felt constant. She found comfort in his predictable commitment to vigilance. This recognition fueled Melman. He felt seen, not just as an anxious mess, but as the dedicated, if slightly overzealous, medical conscience of the group. He presented her with a perfectly cleaned, dried-out pebble as a token of his stable devotion. The penguin's aerial ambitions were reaching critical mass. Skipper, convinced that the city was just a larger, more poorly organized territory to conquer, directed the assembly of their salvaged drone. Kowalski had managed to jury-rig a primitive guidance system using the compass from a forgotten tourist's backpack and a magnetized bottle cap. Their greatest challenge was power. The battery life was abysmal. Private, looking slightly overwhelmed but determined, volunteered to become the primary power source, strapping himself into a makeshift harness connected to a series of spinning gears, attempting to generate kinetic energy through frantic, morale-boosting flapping. Rico, meanwhile, was meticulously cataloging all available escape routes, labeling them based on difficulty and likelihood of involving high-velocity projectile deployment. They were no longer interested in just escaping the zoo, they were planning to achieve low Earth orbit. The zoo felt less like a home and more like a meticulously maintained waiting room. Alex, feeling the weight of his unspent wilderness prowess, had developed a peculiar habit of staring intently at the shadows cast by the enclosure's artificial rock formations, imagining them to be the dense cover of the savanna bush. He communicated mostly through eloquent sighs and highly stylized glares directed at the zookeepers, conveying volumes of unspoken commentary on their lack of wilderness preparedness. He missed the shared danger, the necessary reliance on instinct. His greatest fear now was that the lion he was destined to be, the one Zuba had seen, was fading, diluted by the routine of captivity and the smell of processed food pellets. Marty, spurred by the memory of his successful coordination with the wild zebras, had tried to implement a complex system of visual signaling among the zoo zebras, using subtle ear twitches and tail flicks to communicate non-verbally. It was a total failure. The city zebras, seemingly content with their established, unchanging routines, responded to his intricate codes with blank stares or the occasional bewildered headshake. He began to view the fences not as physical barriers, but as mental ones, trapping the spirit of those around him. His only true outlet remained his conversations with the sky at night, a silent testament to the vastness that still existed beyond the electric lights. Melman's anxieties, while still numerous, had found a strange grounding in his relationship with Gloria. He'd started keeping a detailed log of every interaction with her, noting her body temperature, her breathing regularity, and the precise decibel level of her snores, all under the guise of ensuring her optimal health. Gloria found this meticulous observation deeply romantic. In Africa, she'd felt adrift, searching for something solid. Here, Melman's unwavering, almost ritualistic focus on her well-being was the solid thing she'd craved. She took to gently nudging his enclosure wall during his more panicked episodes, a massive, reassuring contact that seemed to anchor his wildly spinning mind back to the present moment. The penguins, meanwhile, viewed their homemade drone as a stepping stone to true strategic mastery. Skipper had designated Maurice the Aye as the mission's reluctant ground intelligence officer, impressed by the lemur's naturally unsettling stare and sharp digits, deeming him an ideal, if cynical, operative. Kowalski had managed to integrate a repurposed windshield wiper motor into the drone, giving it a bizarre, jerky flight pattern that Skipper insisted was advanced evasive maneuvering. Rico, never satisfied with simple construction, had outfitted the drone with a small spring-loaded bucket intended to deploy specialized, highly disruptive substances, likely just stale bread crusts he'd been hoarding. They weren't escaping the zoo, they were establishing air superiority over their immediate operational theater, fully convinced that world domination was merely a matter of solving the next series of engineering hurdles with sufficient paranoia and ingenuity. The atmosphere inside the Central Park Zoo had become thick with the unspoken tension of ambition meeting limitation. Alex, burdened by the memory of genuine life-or-death leadership, found himself testing the zoo's boundaries not by physical aggression, but by subtle tests of authority over the other enclosures. He noticed the keepers were growing accustomed to his imposing presence, mistaking his primal focus for mere dramatic posing. He began to practice the low, guttural growls he'd learned from Zuba, but instead of signaling dominance over a watering hole, they served to hasten the zookeeper's morning rounds, an ironic application of wild signaling to a bureaucratic schedule. He desperately missed the uncomplicated clarity of the savannah hierarchy, where threats were visible and courage was tangible. Marty's revolutionary zeal met the impenetrable wall of bovine complacency. He tried engaging the local cattle, imported for a bizarre farm exhibit, in philosophical debates about the inherent value of open space versus predictable sustenance. They remained unmoved, chewing eternally, their eyes glazed over with perfect contentment. Marty slumped against the fence, realizing that while he had found his place in the wild, he couldn't force others to seek theirs. He decided to channel his restless energy into an entirely new field, urban exploration, using his newfound agility to navigate the narrow maintenance pathways only when the guards weren't looking, treating the service corridors as his personal, if grimy, savannah trails. Melman's medical fixation found an unexpected catalyst in Gloria's growing maternal protectiveness. When Gloria gently chastised him for worrying over a tiny crack in the concrete, he interpreted her firm tone not as exasperation, but as a challenge to elevate his diagnostic skills. He started developing complex, color-coded charts detailing every minor change in Gloria's appetite and posture, viewing her robust health as the ultimate high-stakes mission. Gloria, touched by the depth of his commitment, allowed him this ritual, knowing that his anxiety was simply his intense way of showing love. Their bond was solidified by the shared knowledge that they had faced true adversity together, making the petty concerns of enclosure life almost charmingly trivial. The penguins, viewing the zoo's electrical grid as an unoptimized energy source, launched Operation Gridlock. Skipper had deemed the zoo's internal power systems a critical weakness that could be exploited for launching their drone beyond city limits. Kowalski, using scavenged copper wiring, managed to tap into the secondary lighting circuit, causing localized, suspicious brownouts that the zookeepers blamed on aging city infrastructure. Rico, in a moment of inspired scavenging, had procured a small, sophisticated set of miniature tools from a discarded model airplane kit, which he was now using to subtly sabotage the locking mechanisms on less frequented supply closets, creating potential emergency exits that only the penguins knew existed. Private, meanwhile, was diligently training the carrier pigeons to recognize the sound of Skipper's specific whistle, preparing them for long-range intelligence-gathering missions over Manhattan, convinced that the city itself was just a confusingly large, poorly managed habitat, waiting for their superior organizational skills. The collective return to normalcy was proving to be a far more complex challenge than surviving the African drought. Alex, wrestling with his identity, began practicing his stage roar in the dead of night, the sound echoing hollowly against the surrounding skyscrapers. He realized that while Zuba had taught him the importance of strength, he now understood that true leadership in their confined environment required translating that primal power into something the city understood: presence and control, even if manufactured. He started making deliberate eye contact with the zoo director during inspections, holding the gaze until the man nervously shifted his clipboard, a small, significant victory in this battle of wills. Marty, unable to sustain genuine stampedes, began incorporating his energy into hyper-efficient, almost invisible maintenance tasks. He'd nudge stray leaves into neat piles, realign slightly crooked signage, and instinctively herd any lost tourist brochures toward the nearest trash receptacle. He was performing the vital, unseen work of a community organizer, channeling the intense loyalty he felt for his herd into caring for the small, immediate world they inhabited. His zest hadn't diminished, it had merely been compressed, waiting for a bigger stage. Melman and Gloria's domesticity was now a study in complementary anxieties. Melman's obsessive data collection served as a bizarre form of proactive care for Gloria, whose sheer size meant she sometimes moved without noticing minor hazards. He'd rush to inspect any spot where she had rested, cataloging the subtle indentations in the earth, convinced he was safeguarding her against invisible seismic threats. Gloria found this devotion grounding. In Africa, she'd feared being left behind. Here, Melman's inability to leave her side, driven by fear of contamination, was the ultimate form of security. She often wondered how they had ever existed without this strange mutual reliance. The penguins treated the zoo's internal workings as a constant, low-level insurgency. Skipper had identified the main irrigation system as the key vulnerability for launching their next aquatic-based escape. Kowalski, having repurposed an old water filter into a chemical analysis station, was primarily focused on brewing a concentrated, highly adhesive slime from expired yogurt, intended to temporarily blind surveillance cameras. Rico had become disturbingly adept at stealth. He could now enter and exit the supply shed completely undetected, his acquisitions often appearing mysteriously inside their habitat, a new set of specialized climbing gear, perhaps a length of reinforced garden hose. Private, ever the loyal lieutenant, was diligently training a small flock of local sparrows, convincing them that the seeds they were given were spy-grade rations, necessary for aerial reconnaissance missions over the Bronx Zoo, convinced that territorial expansion was the only cure for stagnation. The pervasive sense of the world having shrunk was most acutely felt by Alex during the mandatory Meet the Animals sessions. He would stand stoically, the African sun now a distant, remembered warmth, and listen to the parents pointing out his magnificent mane. They saw a king. He felt like a highly decorated, retired general forced to command toy soldiers. His patience, once infinite when managing Zuba's pride, was now frayed by the casual indifference of the crowds. He started communicating his frustration not through roars, but through an almost theatrical stillness, holding poses so perfectly balanced and intense that visitors often mistook it for extreme boredom, leading to whispered complaints about his lack of enthusiasm. He began meticulously grooming the dirt in his enclosure, shaping it into miniature, temporary topographic maps of the savanna, erasing them before the keepers could notice the unauthorized landscaping. Marty, having exhausted the possibilities of quiet rebellion, decided to embrace the chaos of urban influence. He discovered the rhythmic, relentless pulse of the city buses rumbling past the perimeter. He started timing his daily sprints to coincide with their passage, using the distant, dull roar of the traffic as his substitute for the thunder of 1,000 running hooves. He was learning to find the wild in the artificial. He even managed to inspire a few of the more impressionable primates to attempt brief, synchronized movements, though their attempts usually devolved into chaotic flinging of fruit, a poor imitation of coordinated herd dynamics, but a step toward shared purpose nonetheless. Melman's commitment to Gloria's health had taken on an almost religious fervor. He now insisted on performing daily environmental integrity checks around her habitat, often sliding small, sterile swabs under the perimeter barrier to test for residual pollutants brought in by visitors. Gloria found this bizarre routine deeply reassuring. In the savannah, survival was about immediate external threats. Here, Melman was guarding them against invisible urban decay, a battle she realized was just as vital to their long-term survival in this strange new environment. She began bringing him shiny pebbles she found on her walks, not as gifts, but as certified non-toxic samples for his collection, validating his obsessive work and solidifying their symbiotic relationship built on fear and absolute trust. The penguins, however, viewed the zoo's internal structure as merely the training ground for their next grand operation. Skipper declared that the adjacent reptile house presented an unacceptable security risk due to its unpredictable, cold-blooded operatives. Kowalski had adapted the drone's guidance system to utilize electromagnetic interference, convinced he could steer it by hijacking weak city signals. Rico had developed a sophisticated system of tripwires made from discarded fishing line around their headquarters, and his newest acquisition was a high-powered magnifying glass, which he was using with alarming focus on Private's less-than-fluffy feathers, perhaps attempting some kind of biological alteration. Private, meanwhile, was tasked with cultivating a small patch of highly potent, fast-growing weeds near the director's office window, intending to use the resulting obscuration as cover for their eventual, long-planned breakout of the city entirely, setting their sights firmly beyond the zoo walls and onto the open highways beyond. The sequel to the wildly successful animated feature, Madagascar, Escape 2. Africa plunges the familiar zoo escapees into a far grander and more culturally resonant setting. Moving beyond the initial novelty of New York expatriates finding their footing in the wild, this installment focuses heavily on themes of heritage, belonging, and the sometimes jarring collision between urban conditioning and innate instinct. Alex the lion, the undeniable star and reluctant leader, faces a crisis of identity rooted in his professional life as a performer. His meticulous control, honed by years under the spotlight in Central Park Zoo, clashes violently with the chaotic reality of the African savanna. The film cleverly explores the internal conflict of a character whose entire self-worth has been tied to an audience. His yearning to reconnect with his roots, particularly his long-lost father, Zuba, becomes the emotional anchor of the narrative. Zuba represents the untamed, authentic version of Alex that the pampered city lion both craves and fears. Alex's initial attempts to lead the pride are hilariously disastrous, illustrating that talent in one arena does not automatically translate to another. His performance routines, born from circus training and Broadway dreams, are useless against the primal demands of the wild. Marty the zebra continues his role as the unwavering optimist, but here his existential search takes a more profound turn. His discovery of a large herd of zebras who share his distinctive black and white stripes triggers a temporary but significant identity crisis. Marty's desire to fit in and experience true community, a theme central to his character arc since the first film, momentarily overshadows his individuality. The sequence where he attempts to mimic the herd's behavior, only to find himself frustrated by his inherent differences, speaks volumes about the illusion of conformity. His friendship with Alex is tested by these divergent paths, highlighting that shared experience doesn't always mean shared destiny. Melman the hypochondriac giraffe, voiced with perfect neurotic energy, finds his anxieties amplified by the move to the African plains. His obsession with health risks escalates from concerns about diet and hygiene in New York to outright terror over predatory animals and environmental instability. Melman's journey becomes unexpectedly heroic when his medical knowledge becomes vital to the community, particularly during a drought. His budding romance with Gloria the hippo gains traction as he is forced to confront danger to protect her, subtly showing that love can be a powerful motivator even for the most timid soul. Gloria herself, ever the grounded and nurturing presence, grounds the more outlandish antics, providing a necessary emotional ballast for the group. The supporting cast continues to deliver sharp comedic relief. King Julian, the self-proclaimed monarch of the lemurs, is transplanted from his island domain to the larger, more imposing African jungle, where his authority is immediately challenged by the larger fauna. His flamboyant, pseudo-monarchical delusions remain intact, yet the scale of his ego now dwarfs his meager following. His interactions with Maurice and Mort serve as predictable but reliable sources of slapstick and tangential commentary on leadership. The film's primary strength lies in its visual spectacle and its commitment to building out the world. The animation, showcasing vast landscapes and intricate tribal interactions, feels significantly more ambitious than the relatively contained environments of the first movie. The narrative deliberately uses the African setting not just as a backdrop, but as a mirror reflecting the characters' inner turmoil. The drought plotline, while perhaps a touch convenient for driving the plot toward a resolution, serves as a necessary catalyst, forcing the disparate groups, the zoo animals, the lions, and the local wildlife, to cooperate. The introduction of Makunga, the antagonist lion, is crucial. Makunga represents everything Zuba tried to suppress in Alex: arrogance, territorial dominance, and a disdain for showmanship. Makunga's villainy is tied directly to the theme of legacy and the struggle for true leadership within the pride structure. His challenge forces Alex to abandon performance and embrace genuine courage, synthesizing his urban skills, like showmanship distraction, with true natural bravery. The final confrontation is less about physical strength and more about Alex proving his worth as a leader through ingenuity and sacrifice, finally reconciling the zoo star with the Wild King. Madagascar, Escape. 2. Africa successfully evolves its core characters, offering them deeper personal stakes while maintaining the fast-paced, joke-heavy rhythm that audiences initially embraced. The emotional resonance of the sequel is deeply tied to the exploration of familial bonds, a dimension largely absent in the original film's focus on mere survival and geographical displacement. Alex's paternal narrative, centered on Zuba, is poignant because it forces him to confront the possibility that he is fundamentally unlike the father he idolizes. Zuba, the proud, battle-scarred leader of the Pride, views Alex's performance background with undisguised paternal disappointment, a sting far sharper than any criticism Alex might have received from New Yorkers. This dynamic taps into a universal anxiety, the fear of disappointing one's heritage, of being deemed too soft or too civilized by those who embody the primal essence one seeks to reclaim. Alex's journey isn't just about learning to hunt, it's about earning the respect of the one person whose approval matters most, a quest that requires vulnerability rather than perfected choreography. Marty's subplot, while comedic in its execution, the mass confusion when the zebras discover they all look the same, serves a serious purpose in questioning the very definition of individuality. His initial thrill at belonging, the feeling of being part of something larger, quickly sours when he realizes that conformity demands sacrificing the quirky, passionate spirit that defines him. The film cleverly uses the idea of herd mentality to satirize groupthink. Marty's inherent desire for deep connection contrasts sharply with Alex's focus on performance legacy. Marty seeks genuine acceptance, while Alex seeks validation of skill. This divergence strains their friendship, showing that even the strongest bonds must stretch to accommodate personal evolution. Melman's transformation from a bundle of neuroses to an accidental savior is perhaps the sequel's most satisfying arc. His paralyzing fear is always rooted in a desire to protect himself. But when the drought threatens Gloria and the larger community, his latent medical expertise, developed, one presumes, through obsessive reading of health pamphlets in Central Park, becomes the group's lifeline. His giraffe stature, usually a source of awkwardness, becomes an advantage in spotting the distant water source. His successful pursuit of Gloria, characterized by clumsy but determined efforts to prove his utility, moves their relationship past the polite flirtation of the first film into a genuine partnership where his perceived weakness becomes a source of unexpected strength. Gloria, meanwhile, embodies patience and pragmatism. She loves Melman not in spite of his anxieties, but perhaps because his intense focus on care mirrors her own nurturing instincts. King Julien's predicament adds a layer of political satire. His move to the mainland Africa, where he encounters lions and elephants, strips away the pretense of his island sovereignty. He is reduced from a self-appointed sovereign to a noisy, somewhat tiresome nuisance. His desperate attempts to assert dominance over creatures far larger and more powerful highlight the absurdity of unchecked ego when faced with true wilderness hierarchy. His enduring sidekicks, Maurice and Mort, provide the necessary grounding foil. Maurice, the weary voice of reason, and Mort, the embodiment of unmanageable adoration, ensuring Julien never becomes too threatening, merely persistently annoying. The visual storytelling in Escape to Africa is markedly richer. The scale of the migration sequences and the intimate details of the Lion Pride's meeting grounds feel earned, benefiting from a larger budget and a clearer vision of the African landscape beyond generic jungle tropes. The film invests time in showing the community dynamics of the native animals, the pride politics, the resource scarcity, making the zoo animals' intrusion feel less like a vacation and more like an ecological intervention. This grounding prevents the humor from becoming purely absurdist. The jokes land because they are set against a backdrop of real, tangible stakes, namely the life-or-death struggle against Makunga and the environmental crisis. Ultimately, the film succeeds by forcing its pampered protagonists to synthesize their artificial pasts with their natural inheritances, forging identities that are surprisingly complex for a broad family animation. The depth of character development in this second outing rests significantly on the shoulders of the humanized wildlife navigating genuine ecological pressures. The narrative pivots from the novelty of fish-out-of-water comedy to a deeper examination of what constitutes a legitimate community and leadership. Alex's relationship with his father, Zuba, transcends simple reunion. It is a crucible of self-acceptance. Zuba's disappointment stems from the city lion's perceived effeminacy and lack of raw aggression, traits Zuba equates with the survival of his lineage. Alex's struggle to perform a traditional lion roar, replacing it instead with his signature polished King of New York roar, is the perfect encapsulation of this internal schism. The emotional climax isn't the physical victory over Makunga, but the moment Zuba recognizes that Alex's unique intelligence and ability to rally diverse elements, his performance skills redirected as tactical misdirection, are, in fact, a different, equally valid form of strength. This reconciliation allows Alex to integrate his past and present selves, moving beyond the need for external validation from his father or an audience. Marty's existential mirroring of the herd is beautifully executed as a commentary on assimilation versus authenticity. His brief foray into becoming just another zebra highlights a profound fear common among individuals in any close-knit group, the fear of being insignificant or, conversely, the fear of being too different to belong. The scene where Marty tries desperately to follow the herd's rigid migration patterns, only to fail comically, underscores the film's message that inherited traits and learned behavior are inseparable. His bond with Alex is tested because Alex is seeking to reclaim a heritage, the pride, while Marty is seeking to discover one, the herd. When they both realize that their true connection lies outside these conventional structures, with each other, their friendship is reaffirmed on a more mature footing. Melman's ascension into accidental heroism is a wonderful inversion of the stereotype of the weak supporting character. His hypochondria, previously a source of constant self-absorbed comedy, becomes the foundation for his utility. His meticulous attention to sanitation and survival trivia, learned through constant worry, pays dividends when the well runs dry. This plot device serves to validate the seemingly useless traits cultivated in the artificial comfort of the zoo. Gloria's unwavering affection for Melman, even when he is trembling with fear, validates his inherent worth beyond his physical capabilities. She doesn't need a bold alpha male. She requires a partner who is steadfastly committed to the well-being of others, and Melman's detailed focus on health ultimately secures that well-being. King Julian's relocation to the vast African plains serves as a masterclass in comedic deflation. Stripped of the relatively contained ecosystem of Madagascar, his authority dissolves instantly. His attempts to command respect from the local baboons or lions are met with withering indifference or outright derision. This mirrors the experience of many celebrities or small-time dictators when transplanted to a real-world power structure. The veneer of self-importance cracks under genuine pressure. His reliance on Maurice and more becomes even more pronounced, showcasing that even the most narcissistic individuals depend on a small, loyal entourage to maintain their delusions of grandeur. The film uses Julian less as a plot driver and more as a running commentary on the fragility of manufactured status. The visual scope, particularly the rendering of the drought-stricken savanna, introduces a level of environmental realism rarely seen in this franchise. The harsh textures of the dry earth and the desperate faces of the thirsty animals lend weight to the crisis. The narrative successfully balances this gravitas with the slapstick, ensuring that the stakes feel high without sacrificing the film's inherent lightheartedness. The integration of the zoo animals into the native ecosystem, even if temporary, suggests a broader theme. That civilization, represented by their zoo training, can be adapted and applied to solve natural problems, but only when filtered through genuine instinct and community loyalty. The film cements its place not just as a continuation, but as a narrative pivot point where the protagonists stop simply reacting to their environment and begin actively shaping it based on their synthesized experiences. The climax of the narrative skillfully weaves together the disparate character arcs into a unified struggle against Makunga and the drought, proving that the zoo escapees, despite their urban conditioning, have absorbed vital lessons from their initial adventure. Alex's ultimate triumph over Makunga is not achieved through brute force, which is Zuba's domain, but through performance artistry repurposed for conflict resolution. By staging a convincing spectacle, a calculated distraction utilizing the elements of showmanship he perfected in New York, Alex outmaneuvers the brute strength of Makunga. This resolution is deeply satisfying because it validates the entirety of Alex's character history. His time as a performer was not a detour from his true self, but a necessary prerequisite for becoming a modern, effective leader, capable of strategic thinking beyond instinctual aggression. Zuba's acceptance flows naturally once he witnesses this blend of inherited courage and acquired cunning, finally seeing Alex as a complete lion, not a flawed imitation. Marty, having navigated the crisis of belonging, plays a critical role in uniting the disparate factions for the final push toward the water source. His ability to communicate with and motivate the large zebra herd, not by trying to be one of them, but by championing their collective cause, demonstrates a nuanced understanding of leadership built on empathy rather than conformity. He realizes that true community isn't about erasing differences, but celebrating them within a shared objective. His influence helps bridge the gap between the guarded pride and the more cosmopolitan zoo animals, showing that diverse skill sets are necessary for true survival in a complex environment. Melman and Gloria's partnership solidifies during the hazardous relocation effort. Gloria provides the emotional stability and physical encouragement that allows Melman to operate at peak efficiency despite his terror. His success in guiding the group, often relying on detailed geographical memory gleaned from obsessive map reading, another manifestation of his anxiety, underscores the theme that specialized knowledge, no matter how eccentrically acquired, holds value. The affection between them blossoms into a committed partnership, where Gloria accepts Melman's essential nervousness as part of the package, while Melman gains the confidence necessary to act decisively when his loved ones are threatened. Their dynamic offers a sweet counterpoint to the more volatile paternal struggles of Alex. King Julian's contribution, while marginal to the main crisis, adheres perfectly to his character's established comedic function. His primary concern remains securing his own comfort and status, regardless of the impending environmental doom. However, even in his self-absorption, his antics often inadvertently serve as humorous distractions or provide minor, accidental assistance to the main characters, reinforcing the idea that chaos can sometimes play an unintended positive role in densely packed narratives. Maurice and Mort remain the essential anchors to Julian's absurdity, their unwavering loyalty, or sheer bewilderment, allowing the humor to land without requiring Julian to mature significantly, preserving the franchise's established comedic rhythm. The film successfully uses the resolution of the drought to symbolize the resolution of the characters' internal conflicts. The return of the water signifies a renewal of hope and a balanced integration of the zoo life and the wild instinct. The decision of the group to return to their temporary New York haven is significant. It is no longer an escape from danger, but a conscious choice based on established relationships and familiarity. They have faced their heritage, overcome challenges native to the wild, and in doing so have forged an even stronger, more resilient bond as a found family defined not by geography or species, but by shared, hard-won experience. The sequel concludes by proving that identity is not something inherited wholesale from the past, but something actively constructed from the synthesis of all experiences. The concluding sequences of Madagascar, Escape 2. Africa transitioned smoothly into themes of chosen belonging, establishing a mature equilibrium for the core quartet that surpasses the novelty of their initial escape. The decision to leave Africa, rather than representing a failure to fully assimilate into the wild, a path Alex initially believed he needed to take, is framed as a triumphant assertion of self-determination. They have visited their roots, navigated the complexities of instinct versus conditioning, and found that their truest identity resides in their unique collective, forged in the crucible of the zoo and refined by the savannah. This conclusion respects the characters' origins while acknowledging their significant growth, suggesting that the found family dynamic is perhaps the most authentic heritage they possess. Alex's final acknowledgement of Zuba is filled with quiet pride rather than explosive joy. The shared moment emphasizes mutual respect over paternal approval. Alex understands that his father will likely never fully grasp the nuances of a life lived under artificial lights, just as Alex cannot wholly abandon the skills that made him a star. This acceptance of permanent difference within a loving relationship is a sophisticated thematic beat for a family film. His return to New York is not a retreat into complacency, but a strategic repositioning, armed with the understanding that performance can be a tool of leadership, not just entertainment. Marty's acceptance of his singular identity is perhaps the most understated yet powerful takeaway. He ceases the frantic search for a mirror image and settles comfortably into the realization that his value lies precisely in his distinctiveness within the group. The shared journey has taught him that belonging isn't about blending in. It's about finding others who appreciate the vibrant singularity you bring to the collective endeavor. His ease in interacting with the native African animals during the final goodbyes, no longer desperate to imitate them, showcases newfound confidence rooted in self-knowledge. Melman and Gloria's relationship enters a phase of quiet domesticity, perfectly suited to their personalities. Melman, though still prone to excessive vigilance, now channels his anxiety into preemptive caregiving. His neuroses have been repurposed into hyper-awareness for their shared future, whether in Central Park or elsewhere. Gloria's acceptance is complete. She is grounded by his devotion, appreciating the stability his meticulous nature brings to their inherently unpredictable lives. Their romance is characterized by practical commitment, a refreshing contrast to the flamboyant pursuits often associated with animated romantic arcs. King Julian's mandatory departure from the African mainland signifies a return to his comfort zone, a place where his small-scale tyranny can flourish without the scrutiny of genuinely powerful creatures. His exaggerated relief upon returning to the familiarity of Madagascar, however brief that stay might prove to be, reinforces his role as the comic relief whose defining characteristic is an inability to learn from larger, more challenging environments. He remains delightfully static, providing a necessary tether to the more farcical elements of the franchise, assuring the audience that not all characters must undergo profound transformation. Ultimately, Escape to Africa successfully manages the sequel paradox, deepening character stakes without abandoning the established comedic formula. By contrasting the manufactured life of the zoo with the authentic pressures of the wild, the film argues that identity is not a fixed inheritance, but a dynamic compilation of learned responses and innate predispositions. The protagonists return home not as the same animals who left, but as complex individuals who have earned the right to define their own natural habitat, wherever they choose to be together. The enduring success of the Madagascar franchise hinges on its ability to continually place its protagonists outside their comfort zones, forcing a recursive re-examination of what it means to be civilized versus wild. In the aftermath of the African sojourn, the return to the familiar confines of the Central Park Zoo, or at least the anticipation of it, brings with it a subtle but profound shift in perspective. The animals no longer view the zoo as a mere temporary holding cell or a regrettable prison. It is now their chosen domain, imbued with personal significance derived from the trials they overcame far away. This final status quo feels less like resignation and more like a strategic re-establishment of base camp, a location now overlaid with the memories of epic achievement. Alex, in particular, carries the weight and triumph of his chieftain experience. The scars, both visible and psychological, from confronting Makunga and earning Zuba's respect, become his new mantle of leadership within the zoo hierarchy. He retains the sheen of the performer, but it is now coated with the hard-won patina of a genuine protector. The way he interacts with the human caretakers, and potentially with any new zoo arrivals, would undoubtedly reflect a newfound patience and a deeper understanding of genuine threat versus perceived nuisance. His mastery is no longer reliant on the approval of a crowd, but on the quiet confidence that he can lead when true crisis calls, a confidence rooted in facing lions in their own territory. Marty's journey culminates in a celebration of internal diversity. His brief flirtation with homogeneity has cured him of the need to seek external validation through imitation. He likely settles into a more relaxed, self-assured existence, perhaps even mentoring other younger animals in embracing their eccentricities. The lesson learned, that being unique is the key to surviving a complex world, not a hindrance to belonging, is a crucial message embedded in his arc. He understands that his value to Alex, Gloria, and Melman lies precisely in the elements that made him an anomaly in the zebra herd. Melman and Gloria represent the consolidation of a truly interdependent relationship. Their return signals an end to Melman's purely defensive posture. While the threat of germs remains an intrinsic part of his personality, the severity of his responses is likely tempered by the memory of actively saving lives. His commitment to Gloria acts as a powerful antidote to his self-absorption. For Gloria, her happiness is now intrinsically linked to Melman's capacity for bravery under pressure. Their established intimacy means that the everyday bickering will be underscored by an unshakable mutual trust. They have, quite literally, faced death together and survived through collaboration. King Julian, having been suitably humbled by the sheer scale of African politics, is unlikely to have undergone any lasting philosophical change. However, his narrative function might evolve slightly. Having witnessed true power structures, his performance as king might become more self-awarely theatrical, a knowing nod to his own limitations, even if he refuses to verbally admit them. He becomes less a genuine threat to order and more an acknowledged, highly entertaining fixture of the zoo's ecosystem, a necessary element of the bizarre domesticity they have created. The sequel's legacy lies in its successful transformation of the characters from simple escapees into defined individuals whose pasts inform their present capabilities. The adventure was not about getting back to New York, but about discovering who they would be when they arrived back there. They return enriched, having mapped the territory of their own identities against the vast, unforgiving backdrop of the natural world, ready to face the mundane challenges of captivity with the hard-won wisdom of the wild. The lasting impression of Madagascar. Escape 2. Africa is the franchise's successful pivot from environmental comedy to an exploration of personal legacy and the synthesis of contrasting influences. The very concept of home has been redefined, moving from a physical location, the zoo, to an abstract state achieved through relational bonds. The story posits that true freedom isn't geographical but psychological, achieved when one reconciles the inherited self with the cultivated self. Alex's reconciliation with Zuba sets the benchmark for this maturation. The lion ultimately teaches his father that heritage is not a rigid blueprint, but a dynamic framework upon which one builds. Zuba, representing the unwavering tradition of the pride, learns that strength manifests in adaptability, while Alex learns that raw instinct must be tempered by strategic thinking, a skill honed in the artificial arena of entertainment. This integration means Alex is no longer simply playing a role. He embodies a new archetype, the culturally intelligent leader who can command respect both in the savannah and under the glare of city lights. His performance skills, once seen as weaknesses by the pride, become his signature advantage, validating the non-linear path of his life. Marty's arc is arguably the most subtle yet transformative. His initial existential yearning to merge with the herd stemmed from a deep-seated, almost childlike desire for uncomplicated acceptance. His journey back from that brief identity loss confirms that he thrives on the friction generated by his own unique perspective. He is the necessary disruptive element within the core group, preventing stagnation. His friendship with Alex becomes a testament to sustaining relationships despite divergent foundational needs. One sought ancestral validation, the other sought communal belonging, and both found resolution by prioritizing their bond over their respective searches. Melman's development is intrinsically linked to his relationship with Gloria, demonstrating how deep affection can override deeply ingrained psychological barriers. His hypochondria, while never entirely vanquished, as this would betray his established comedic identity, is now clearly subordinated to his protective instincts. The giraffe has moved past mere anxiety toward active responsibility. He embodies the film's quiet argument that even the most specialized, seemingly impractical skill sets, like obsessive cataloging of health risks, can become life-saving assets when placed in the right context. Gloria's unwavering presence acts as his secure anchor, a constant that allows his inherent cautiousness to transition into calculated caution. King Julian's steadfast refusal to change serves an important structural purpose in maintaining the franchise's tonal balance. He acts as the baseline of unadulterated self-interest, against which the main character's growth is measured. His utter incomprehension of the African pride dynamics, where leadership involves actual risk and responsibility rather than mere fanfare, provides necessary comic contrast. Maurice and Moore ensure Julian remains tethered to his familiar, absurd orbit, offering a necessary, predictable counterpoint to the narrative's more emotionally resonant explorations of family and belonging. The visual language supporting this thematic conclusion is rich. The contrast between the sun-scorched plains of Africa and the lush, albeit contained, green of the Central Park enclosure signifies the characters' mastery over their environment, wherever they choose to reside. They are no longer merely surviving in the wild, they are commanding their space in civilization. Escape 2. Africa thus solidifies its place not just as a successful sequel, but as the narrative phase where the protagonists cease being perpetual outsiders and finally become fully realized architects of their own chosen reality, defined by resilience forged in shared hardship. The film's closing moments underscore a final, crucial understanding. True heritage is forged in shared experience, not merely inherited through lineage or genetics. The journey back to New York is tinged with a bittersweet nostalgia for the savannah, acknowledging that the wild served its purpose as a proving ground, but their genuine community thrives where their established relationships are strongest. Alex, having wrestled with the expectations of the lion pride, no longer feels the crushing need to perform for Zuba's approval. Instead, he carries a quiet authority, an internal peace derived from knowing he successfully navigated the ultimate test of lionhood on his own terms. This internal validation is far more robust than any external acclaim he might have chased as a zoo performer. Marty's integration back into the established group dynamic is marked by an increased confidence in his own distinctiveness. His enthusiastic retelling of the zebra herd encounter is no longer tinged with longing, but with amusement at his own past folly. He understands now that his spirit, which caused him to stand out among the zebras, is precisely what makes him invaluable to his small, eclectic circle of friends. He has metabolized the anxiety of not fitting in, realizing